There is a bit to talk about offer in terms of an offer. In your research assignment, you'll need to discuss what we've talked about here in determining whether a valid offer is there or not, and in particular where the offer is. Where is the offer? And then we start to look at acceptance. Now, acceptance has a variety of rules as well, such as that your acceptance must be clear, has to be positive, and it leaves no doubt in terms of you are accepting that offer. One thing that's important is that it must be a mirror image. If it's not, it's a counter offer. So that means it hasn't been accepted, but you've created a new offer. And conditions can exist insofar as that it prevents the contract from becoming binding until specific conditions are met. And the Masters and Cameron is a case example of that, where you've got this agreement being signed that is subject to a term that states that this agreement is subject to the preparation of a formal contract of sale, which shall be acceptable to Cameron's solicitors on the above terms and conditions. So here we've got an exchange of money, we've got a deposit that's been paid, all of the other elements are satisfied except for acceptance in these circumstances, because there's this condition on what acceptance actually means. Now, the parties never finished the formal contract. The solicitors never completed it. And because of this, the court held that there was not an enforceable contract because the conditions of acceptance hadn't been met. So you can stipulate what conditions need to be met. If they're not, it's not binding. That's because of that, the deposit was returned. And in the circumstances, the agreement was never finally formed. So if we look at that concept of subject to contract, could mean some different things, and this is what the courts considered in Cameron and Masters. Have they reached a final agreement that's so clear, but all they're doing is setting it out in a more precise form? If that was the case here, they would have held it to be binding. Have the parties reached a certain level of finality? It would have been binding. But in this circumstance, it was concluded they needed this formal, final contract that, and the important part in the sentence is, that was acceptable to Cameron's solicitors. The fact that it says acceptable means that there could have been some movement in the final agreement. So because of that movement, the subject wasn't satisfied and there's no acceptance. So firstly, we must have clear and unequivocal acceptance, so leaves no doubt. The second rule is that any requirements that the offerer has must be met. So if they make a method of acceptance particularly exclusive, so I will only accept acceptance via email, means that that requirement must be met. If I haven't put a method of acceptance, it has to be something that's reasonable or the same. And one rule that we do look at in some detail, and this is important for you guys, research assignment, whenever I say something's important, think research assignment. Acceptance is communicated only when received by the offerer. Has to be received. There's one exception to this rule, though, that is very important, and that's known as the postal acceptance rule. Very important postal acceptance rule. Know this rule. So in 1817, on the 2nd of September, we've got the defendants, Linsell mailing an offer to sell, I believe it was wool, to Adams for a certain price. Now that letter was misdirected, and it wasn't received by the plaintiffs until the 5th. So it's taken 3 days to get there. The plaintiffs have accepted the offer in the letter to purchase this wool and mailed it directly back to Linsell. Now that acceptance was received by the defendant on the 9th. So it's taken 2 days to get back. But in between the time that the defendant has sent the original offer on the 2nd, compared to when they received the acceptance on the 9th, 7 days, they've sold the wool to someone else. Because there's no wool, the plaintiffs are suing to say that there's a breach of contract. We accepted it by sending the letter on the 7th. Sorry, but on the 5th. So the postal acceptance rule is an exception to what we were saying before around acceptance has to be communicated or received. If it's by mail, acceptance is actually from the time it is put in the post box. So even though the defendant had not received this mail, the offer had been accepted on the 7th. And then they were in fact in breach of the contract by selling it to someone else. It's a hard one to reconcile with, because what you find is a circumstance where the defendant didn't even realise the contract had been formed yet, and it had. Important. Know the postal acceptance rule and what that means. Offer acceptance is at the time the letter is submitted to the post box, not when it's received. So I've sent it on the 7th. The defendants revoked their offer on the 9th. They're in breach, even though they haven't received the letter yet. Does that make sense? You will have postal acceptance rule. Know it. This is different to emails. I'll just quickly on the postal acceptance rule though. You can avoid it by specifying that it doesn't apply. So if you're expecting them to send by mail, I'd put in my contract, we don't follow the postal acceptance rule. It's only when it's received. So I put a condition on acceptance. Alternatively, they may make it known that post is the only acceptable method. No conditions on it mean that the postal acceptance rule applies. This 4th bullet point is important, because if you get the offer by post, it can be implied that post is acceptable mode to acceptance. Maybe in your research question there's a postal offer. Excellent. And again, I was saying before that it presents that potential difficulty as the offerer is really unaware that acceptance has occurred, but that's too bad. On the flip side, emails are different. We've got legislation called the Electronic Transactions Act, ETA, that talks about recipients receiving the email as the time of acceptance. So you send the email, goes up into the interwebs, and then it goes into someone's inbox. Now, the acceptance is really at the time it gets to that person's inbox, which is generally instantaneous. So you send it, generally gets there within, it depends on your settings, within seconds. I have a setting that allows me to undo for 30 seconds, so mine will be 30 seconds. Good idea in professional capacity to have that undo, because you never know when you're going to accidentally send the wrong thing. And as lawyers and accountants, it can cost you a lot of money. So emails are different. You'll also note that when you're on a computer, you'll get a bunch of terms and conditions pop up every now and then. Facebook will ask you to agree to their privacy. Has anyone read the privacy statement? Is anyone a little bit worried to read their privacy statement? Facebook make a lot of money on personal information. That's their dollars. The way they analyse your information, sell it, use it for advertisements, is the value that they get. But their privacy statement pretty much says that they own your information. If anyone's interested in knowing what Facebook information they have on you, you can go to the settings and download them. It takes about 30 minutes to 40 minutes, but you can see everything that Facebook has on you. Photos, your chats, what you've liked, your groups. And what they do with that information is they target you with advertisements. I know when I started Googling microphones, this came up as an advertisement. Because they've got something called cookies. So when you're Googling something and you're in Facebook land, they're tracking you. And then they use that to market. And then you go, oh, that's something that I'm interested in, I'll buy it. Then who pays Facebook? The advertisers. So when you get your privacy statement from Facebook, you'd get this long statement's huge, and then a button that says I agree. Under the ETA, even if you don't read those terms and conditions, because no one does, you're bound by them when you click accept. As soon as you say accept, you're bound by those terms and conditions, privacy statements, disclaimers, and the like. The ETA also steps in to clarify offers when it's in an online atmosphere. So website ads are invitations to treats, and when you go to purchase those goods, you're making an offer, not accepting an offer, similar to a physical store. And then when you get the confirmation email, it's the acceptance. Happens all instantaneous. Sorry for scaring you about Facebook. Same as WhatsApp? A lot of information. Google, similarly. Companies that you work for will be able to track your internet. It's actually quite amazing the amount of information and data that's out there. And just be careful. Like, a lot of people are now starting to avoid social medias because of a worry for their personal information. If you're interested in privacy and stuff like that, always talk to me. That's my area. Interesting area. So rule 3 is the acceptance must be in reliance of the offer. So here we have R and Clark, remembering that R, it's a criminal term that means the queen or the king. So in a criminal aspect, the cases are brought on behalf of the monarch. So it might be Rex or Regina, depending if it's the king or queen. So in 1927 we have a reward case. And that reward case was payment of money to anyone that provided information that led to an arrest of someone who was responsible for the murder of 2 policemen. So we've got Clark, who was arrested because the police thought he was involved, and he kind of was by implication. And to get himself out of trouble, he gave information that led to the conviction of these other people that actually did the murders. Now the question there was, should also note that he wasn't aware that the reward existed. He was just trying to get himself out of trouble. So the question is, was there valid acceptance in the circumstances? And what the court says that because he didn't even know about the reward, he's not accepting it. He can't, because he's not giving his acceptance in reliance of the offer. So because he was doing it to clear himself, there's no contract. Similarly, if there's a swimming race in the Sydney Harbour, you're on a boat, you're not in the race. But as part of the race competition terms and conditions, the first person to cross the line gets $1,000. Your boat then sinks for some reason. And to save your life, you swim, and somehow you cross the finish line first. Because you're doing it to save your life, and you've never entered the competition in the first place, you're not entitled to that prize. Because you're not swimming in reliance of that offer. Rule 4, acceptance must be communicated. So here we've got a case, these were cousins as well, Finley and Bindley, Feldhaus and Bindley, sorry, where Feldhaus wrote to Bindley, who is the owner of the horse, if you don't hear from me, I'll consider it mine at that price. So you can't accept by silence generally. So because he didn't respond to it, there was no acceptance. You can't just put a condition there that says, oh, if you don't respond, the contract's formed. That's not to say that when we talk about acceptance being communicated, that you can't communicate in an applied way. So say you get an offer. You don't write back to the person, but you just start doing the activity. You start building the house. That's called implied acceptance. So by the action itself, you've communicated acceptance, even though it hasn't been verbally transferred. Acceptance may be communicated by someone else. So it doesn't have to be you to accept. Your agent can accept on your behalf, which would then make you legally bound by that agreement. Here, though, we have a person that was applying for a headmaster's job at a school, and the panel on interview decided that he was the person for the job. Now, one of the panel members, and importantly, noting that acting without authority, told this applicant that he had the job. Now, it later turns out that the panel flip on this and decide to appoint someone else. No worries. Next class? Yeah, that's not a problem. If anyone needs to run, feel free. We'll be finished in 10 minutes, I believe. But if you need to go, don't feel bad. So because of this flipping, Hale has decided to sue because acceptance has been communicated to him. But because he was not authorised to communicate that acceptance, there's no agreement. No contract. On the flip side of that, must be communicated, as I was talking about implied acceptance. Here we've got parties that drafted this contract for the sale of tin or iron, some sort of metallic substance. They've completed, one party's completed it, signed it, returned it to the other party. Metropolitan Railway decided not to sign it and instead just put it in their drawer. But even though they didn't sign it, they carried on doing the works that was outlined in that contract. They completed it, in fact. And what the courts are saying that if you continue to act as if you're bound by that contract, then that's implied acceptance. Because they've acted in accordance with it. Revocation of acceptance is an interesting thing, noting that once the acceptance is communicated, the person can no longer take their offer off the table. So once you've accepted, the offer is standing and binding. It can no longer be revoked. Conversely, until such time as acceptance is communicated, it can be withdrawn or revoked. So you won't see this very often, but for example, you've posted the letter, that's a bad example. You've accepted it, you've written it down, but you haven't posted it yet. Even though you've written down you've accepted, you can still not send it, obviously. but it can be withdrawn or revoked so that there's no contract being entered into in that circumstance. Very rarely will that happen. Don't worry about that one. Just some cases. This is one where you'll see dates, and you will see dates in your research assignment. We've got someone sending a letter on the 1st of October offering to sell tin plate. On the 8th of October, he posts a letter revoking the offer. So he's changed his mind within 7 days. On the 11th of October, Byrne telegraphs acceptance of the offer. And then later sends a letter confirming that acceptance on the 15th. It's not until the 20th of October that the plaintiff, so Byrne, receives this letter that was sent on the 8th. So it took 12 days to get there. At what time would revocation have taken effect in this concept? The almost 20th. So remember that revocation of an offer has to be received. The letter's not received till the 20th, even though it's sent on the 8th.
Before acceptance, it's beyond date on it.
That's right. If it's by post, it's as soon as you post it. So here we've got someone who's posted at least on the 15th. Let's put the telegraph out of it because we don't need to worry about it. The 15th is still before the 20th. Does that make sense? Because they've posted their acceptance on the 15th, before the offer's revoked, there's a binding contract. Even though the offer revocation was sent before the acceptance. Does that make sense? That's confusing as hell for a lot of people, and it took me a long time. So the withdrawal in that circumstance was ineffective, and here we can say the contract was completed on the 11th, and if not the 11th, at least the 15th. Same outcome. Excellent. Important. That case is important. Dickinson and Dodds. An options contract example. The 10th of June, offers to sell that house. This offer remains open until the 12th of June. Dickinson decides to accept. Don't know why. He accepts but doesn't advise him that he's accepting. So the offerer doesn't know that he's accepted. Later on the 11th, Dickinson, who's thought he's accepted, well, he's accepted in his mind anyway, was told by a third party that Dodds had sold it to someone else. Now, the revocation of offer can be from a third party, as long as that third party is a reliable source. So you need to say maybe they're friends, maybe they're business acquaintances. He's found out on the 11th that the offer's been revoked. He's freaked out and thought, I need to accept this quickly. But because the acceptance wasn't communicated, and we're not talking about the postal acceptance here, the offer hasn't been accepted. So this revocation is in time. So all that's required to revoke that offer is to convey that your mind's been changed and you're revoking it. No contract in that circumstance. So other principles of acceptance that we've talked about. No worries, you nearly made it to the end, so that's great. No worries, enjoy accounting and the other subject. Not a problem. So just reiterating, counter offer destroys the original offer. Your case for that is hide and wrench. Request for information is not a counter offer. And an offer cannot be revoked in breach of an options contract. Just a brief PowerPoint slide on lapse of offer. So you can revoke it so long as it hasn't been accepted yet. The offer might lapse in time, so there's no acceptance in a reasonable time. The offerer might by death or insanity, no longer have capacity to enter a contract. Conditions may not be met of the offer. You can have a counter offer. Another one is that what you're selling subsequently becomes destroyed. Maybe you're selling a house and it burns down. How can you then continue with the contract if the good is no longer there? And the other is by not accepting in the prescribed mode. So you may accept it in email, but if they prescribe that it was to be accepted by post, they don't have to accept your offer. Okay. Just got 3 practical examples. So if you do need to go run, and then that will be this lecture, all good. And we can hang out and talk about any questions that you might have. We can go back and cover things, or we can talk about negligence or any problems. We'll just go through examples, 3 of them real quick. So Anne has asked Ben to mow her lawn for $100. What would we call that in the concept of what we've talked about today? Invitation or an offer? Offer. Perfect. And why? That's right. So she's asking Ben. Offer. And there's something there that makes it sufficiently precise that it can be accepted. There's a price. There's a promise. There's 2 parties. There's enough there that can be accepted. Ben has then said he's not interested. What's that? Refusal. That's it. He's refused to accept Anne's offer. And what does a refusal mean? That's it. The offer's been terminated. So because he's refused it, Anne's offer no longer exists. So next day, Ben realises that he's actually really poor, can't pay his rent, and he's gone back to Anne and said, you know what? I'll do it. $100, I'll mow your lawn. What's that? Yeah, new offer. So, we don't have an acceptance yet, do we? Excellent. Anne no longer wants to, maybe she's mowed the lawn herself. Well, now she's actually found someone else to do it. So can Ben enforce or force Anne to allow him to perform that service? No. Because we've got an offer here and no acceptance. Excellent. So no contract. Another example. Anne's offering to sell Ben fruit at a discount. What's that? Almost. We can say it's an offer. We can say it's an offer, but you could argue that it's invitation to treat because what's the discounted price? That's a good point. So Ben asks, can I think about it? Possibly? A agrees. So we don't have an options contract yet. But what we have is this concept that when does an offer expire? Is it within a reasonable time? Yeah. So keep that in mind. 1 month later, Ben asks for the fruit at that price. Too long? Too long, I'd agree. So a reasonable time in the context of fruit has elapsed, so the offer has lapsed. So yes, we've got an attempt to accept the offer, but I don't believe there's an offer to accept. It's lapsed. If it was a car, I would argue that the offer still stands because a month is reasonable for a car to sell.
So can Ben sue if it was a car?
If it was a car, No, because Anne still said they've been sold to someone else. No, you're okay. Where it would change though is if Ben asked tonight, think about it, and he paid some money to keep it open for him exclusively. So here we could probably say Ben's not going to be successful. Yeah. No valid agreement. Excellent. Last example. So this is a car. Good timing. Anne and Ben negotiate the sale of Ben's car. What would we say that is? It's not yet an offer, is it? Yeah, negotiation, maybe an invitation to offer. Yeah, I'm going to sell my car. What would you provide me with? So Anne emails Ben asking, how much do you want for the car? Do we think that's sufficient for an offer, or is it a request for information? Request for information. And remember, that can't be binding if it's not an offer. So Ben replies, the lowest I would accept would be $10,000. What would we say that is? Offer? Could be an offer, or could be a supply of information. I would say that could be argued either way. Let's think of a circumstance where there's multiple parties involved. They've got an add up that opens it up to the world. He's offering $10,000 as the lowest he would go. In that circumstance, I would say that's a supply of information, because people can still offer more amounts, higher amounts. But let's say it was just Anne and Ben directly negotiating. It could be an offer, and that would be up to you to argue. There is one case that doesn't support that, being the Harvey and Facey, but you may be able to distinguish between the two. So Anne replies, okay, it's a deal, I'll collect it on Saturday. It's an acceptance, well, it's expressed as acceptance, but is it an acceptance? Not an acceptance? And why? Excellent. So there's nothing to accept yet, unless you argue that that was an offer. So that's really your train of how you go through the paper. Again, there's no right answer. There's only good arguments. All I want to see is that you know the process. These are the steps. We talk about this, that. Good arguments, top marks, even if it's wrong, from my perspective, because there's no wrong answer. Ben then receives an email from Kath offering to buy the car for $12,000. We've got a third party coming in now, offering. It is an offer in my opinion. So can Ben avoid the deal? It really depends on how you've argued these 2 points. If you said that's an offer and acceptance, then no. If you said that's a supply of information, that's an offer, then he can sell for the higher price of $12,000. And there's a bit of information.